Really, it means the capacity to play and to be in the present moment. And you know, the kids, when kids play, they don't worry about the appropriately. They don't worry about the war, wherever, or climate change. They're just playing in the moment. They're fully present to themselves in imaginative, almost hypnotically imaginative states. So happiness just means being in the present and being allowed to be, no matter what, to have the capacity to play. How long does any creature in nature survive if they're not in touch with their gut feelings? So that being in touch with our bodies and our emotions is essential also. Terrific. But what happens is, if for the sake of fitting with the family or with the culture that doesn't particularly support our authenticity, we have to give up our connection to ourselves, our authenticity, for the sake of attachment. Then being inauthentic, being out of touch with ourselves, is how we survive. We're afraid to be ourselves because we associate being ourselves with a threat of being rejected. And so this means that for the rest of our lives, we're going to be in relationships where we're afraid to be ourselves, to really say what it feels like for us. Now that has terrific implications. When I say terrific, I mean significant implications. When there was purpose and meaning in my life, how did I feel? As compared to when I was doing things that were basically meaningless and didn't come from my authentic self. When I'm doing work, when I engage in activities that express who I genuinely am, and I find a sense of meaning in it, which is to say that what I'm doing makes a difference in the world, or just how I'm showing up makes a difference in the world. Fundamentally, we're connected creatures. Our brains are connected to each other. Our physiology is connected to each other. So when we engage in activities that serve that connection in one way or the other, we find meaning. Love is supposed to be a two-way valve. It's supposed to flow in both directions. When it only flows towards others and you ignore your own needs, then you're taking on way too much stress in this life, and it's going to tell on your health. So nothing wrong with loving others. We're meant to do that. But when we're loving others by chronically suppressing our own needs, where we are always afraid of disappointing others, where our own needs are compulsively ignored, that's a quick route to disease. Social character is the personality traits that a society would seek to inculcate in its members in order to keep itself going. I sort of updated that. Now, in Huxley's Brave New World, people are literally gestated in a test tube, and they're biochemically and environmentally trained and developed to fulfill certain roles and to be happy with those roles. Now, we're not gestated in test tubes, and we're not mechanically programmed like that, but we're almost like we were. Because as Huxley points out in The Brave New World, the thing is to want to do what society expects you to do. So that what we end up wanting to do has got nothing to do with our own particular needs or true nature. It has to do with what the society expects of us. We have this idea that what is normal is also healthy and natural. And I'm saying that in this culture, the norm is neither healthy nor is it natural. In fact, the norm, I think, is making us sick. Number one. Number two, we talk about illnesses and of body and mind as abnormalities. I'm saying that illness in this society, given the conditions, is a normal response to an abnormal circumstance. We don't respond to what happens. We respond to our perception of what happens, to our interpretation of what happens. Number one. Number two, of all the possible interpretations, we choose the worst one.
Yeah.
Number two. Thirdly, what I just said isn't true. We didn't choose it. It's not like you went through all these possibilities and you said,
was it multiple choice? Yeah. I chose option D.
Oh no, he doesn't care about me. He doesn't respect me. You didn't do that. Your brain jumped there automatically, right? Mm-hmm. The question is why?
Yeah.
Now here's the learning. First time in your life that you felt hurt and angry that when you perceived somebody didn't care about you or didn't respect you? Or has it happened before?
This is where the exercise might go sideways. I'm going to hit pause on that. I think that's probably for more of a conversation number one.
But you'd probably agree it's not the first time.
It's not the first time.
Very good. And most people I talk to, it goes back way back.
Yeah, this goes way back.
Into childhood. Okay? And that's what trauma is. We don't respond to the present moment. We respond to the past. No, but along the lines of our discussion, it's a beautiful learning opportunity. Now you get to know. Now, what if you assumed for a moment that you're the most lovable, most worthy of care, most worthy of respect person in the history of the universe, and this guy doesn't do your home? What's your response?
Any number of the other options which does not trigger an intense negative emotional state.
Yeah.
None of those other options would trigger that.
So something in you, I would argue, still believes that you're not worthy of care and respect.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what gets triggered. So who's the one that doesn't care about you, and who's the one that doesn't think you're worthy of respect?
No, it'd be me.
It'd be you.
Yeah.
No, that's a learning.
No, it is.
And this is exactly what you're talking about. You're saying how these difficult things, how these problems are always teaching opportunities. And that's the beauty of healing. There's all the social expectations that you should fit in and think like everybody else thinks, or dress like they all dress, or behave like they all behave. You know, so there's all these pressures not to be yourself. And then what happens is you get sick because the pain of not being yourself is too much. So how do you get back to yourself? Well, the good news is that the self that you abandoned all those years ago, not deliberately, not consciously, and it was never your fault. But what happens is that self that you disconnected from, which is the essence of trauma, is the disconnection from yourself. That never went away. It's still there. And it's talking to your body. So it's a matter of learning how to pay attention. And at some point, you have a decision to make. As a child, I had no choice. When there was a conflict between attachment here, authenticity over here, I had to choose. I didn't even choose because it's not conscious. I had to go with the attachment. And yes, if I'm authentic, I may lose some of my attachments. Some people who really liked me before will not like me. So you lose the attachment. And you have a decision to make. What would you rather have? Who would you rather have in your life? Them or yourself? The addiction wasn't your problem. Your addiction was your attempt to solve a problem. And the real question is, how did that problem develop? How come it's 7 billion human beings in the world you felt lonely? How come you lacked a sense of agency, control, authority in your life? Why were you in so much emotional pain? And everything you've said, the loneliness, the lack of power, the lack of control, the anxiety, these are forms of emotional pain. So my mantra around addiction is not why the addiction, but why the pain. If the parents are in conflict with each other, there's a lot of stress, and the child just doesn't want to bother them with their own emotions. So now the child becomes the parent's emotional caregiver by suppressing their own feelings. So there's this conflict between attachment and authenticity. So in that conflict, attachment is going to win every time, and people suppress their authenticity. And specifically, if they weren't loved for who they are, they're going to work very hard to be liked. And if you want to be liked, just please everybody. Never say no, take everything on, be responsible for other people feel, never disappoint anybody. They're all going to like you, but nobody's going to love you because they don't know you. A child has a need. A child has an absolute need for what we call attachment. Attachment being the drive to be close to somebody so we can be taken care of. The human child being the most immature, helpless, underdeveloped, and for the longest period of time, creature in the universe, our period of attachment is very, very long, but especially in the early years, it's absolutely indispensable. We just can't live with it, can't survive without attachments. No mammal can, but least of all can human beings. So we have this need to attach, to be close to people so they'll take care of us. That's obvious. We have another need, though, that evolution gave us, which is to be, as you said, authentic. And authentic is not some fancy new age spiritual state. It's actually feeling your gut feelings. It's absolutely essential. You can't afford a high-priced therapist. Can you afford to read a book from the library? Lots of great books out there. Can you go on YouTube and listen to people talk about finding yourself in trauma? Can you take a breath? Can you go on YouTube and find some breathing practices? Can you take a cold shower? Because taking a cold shower can make a huge difference to your nervous system. Can you take a walk? Can you look at a tree? Are there online groups that you could join that where you could have useful conversations with people? I mean, there's a lot of stuff people can do.
So somebody will say, it won't work for me.
Then I'd say, who's saying that? Which part of you believes that they won't work for you? And yeah, I'm sure that you've had lots of disappointment, and but which part of you is convinced? Well, the part that is convinced that it won't work for you is the part that was hurt so badly in childhood that you saw no way out. You're still seeing it through the eyes of that child. I think chronic regret is debilitating. It's a lack of self-forgiveness. It's also kind of egotism. It's quite something to recognize. I do recognize that some of the way I parented my kids, the way I showed up, I've often talked about this on your program too, wasn't the best for them, but it was the best I could do at the time. So it's not the question of justifying anything, but it's also not dwelling on the past. Mm-hmm. Regret is to dwell on the past. And what's the point? It's quite something to recognize that I did things that, had I known differently, I would not have done the same way. That's just learning. Regret is an emotional state of that values the past more than the present. And it accuses yourself of doing things for which you had no consciousness to do otherwise. So that's where I stand with regret. Yeah. That the capacity to be empathetic and to recognize the grief and to hold the grief does not obviate the capacity to be happy. One is not disloyal to the suffering in the world by allowing ourselves to be happy. So there's no necessary contradiction. Yeah. And I've seen people on death row who, if they win their appeal, the best thing they can hope for is life in prison without parole, but they're happy. And how do they become happy? Meditation, working through their traumas, having remorse for what they did, connecting with other people, and just connecting with the present moment. So addiction is a bad thing, right? And it's a sin, or it's a mistake, or it's a bad choice, or it's a disease. It's none of that. When you ask people, when I give people my definition of addiction, which is a process that's manifested in any behavior that a person finds temporary relief or pleasure in, and therefore craves, suffers negative consequences in the long term, but doesn't give up despite negative consequences. So it's craving relief, pleasure in the short term, negative consequence long term, inability or refusal to give it up. That's what an addiction is. Drugs, sex, gambling, eating, I don't care what. Look at the word depression. What does it mean to depress something? It means to push it down. What do we push down? We push down our emotions. Why do we push them down? Because it's too dangerous to feel them when they would threaten the attachment relationship. So the pushing down of healthy anger can lead you to autoimmune disease or cancer, neurological disease like ALS. And by the way, you know something? They've done studies. Even with people with ALS who express anger, they live longer than people with ALS who don't express anger. At the heart of all addictions, there's tremendous shame. The addicted individual or individuals, whether they admit it or not, are really ashamed of themselves. So shame shows up in all kinds of ways. And it's a barrier to self-knowledge, because when we're ashamed, we're inclined to protect and to hide. And it's not helpful in either direction. It's not helpful. We have this expression in English that says you should be ashamed of yourself. Well, examine that for a moment. Nobody should be ashamed of one's self. And there's a distinction between being ashamed of what you do and what you've done and who you are and what you are. That's the dilemma for so many of us, is that as a result of childhood wounding, we have to make ourselves into something that the world will accept and value. Like, look, in my case, I love having been a physician, and that's my calling. But the big part of it wasn't just that I wanted to help humanity or heal people. It's also I needed to be important. Now, why did I need to be important? Because as an infant, I got the message that I wasn't.
Yeah.
And so now then, and that creates a kind of an addiction, because you have to keep proving to yourself how important you are and how valuable you are. But nobody should have to prove how valuable they are. That's just our birthright, that we exist. We have the right to be here. Your parents' emotional states start affecting you and your brain development in the womb. That's just the science. So as an adult kid, where do you begin? Well, you have to take responsibility for what's inside you. Not blame, but responsibility.
Yeah.
Not that I'm at fault for it. In fact, you're not at fault for it all. But who's going to be responsible in the present moment to deal with that? Only you can do that. And the same with the adults. Same with the parents. And so that what we teach here is that it's not 50-50. It's 100%, 100%.
Yeah.
And I was talking to somebody today whose mother died before they had reconciled. But this person was still able to come to equanimity with her mother, who had really hurt her sometime after the mother's death, because this person took on the internal task of healing themselves. So, if both partners are around and they both want to work on it, it can be a very beautiful dance. But it does begin in both cases by willing to take responsibility for what we carry inside.
Yeah.
Not for how it got there,
Right.
but for what we're carrying. Trauma is not what happens to you. It's what happens inside you. That's a good thing, by the way, because if trauma, in terms of what happened to me as a Jewish infant under the Nazis, if that was the trauma, I'll never be a person who wasn't a Jewish infant under the Nazis and during that period of genocide. If trauma is the fact that you were abused as a child, you will never be a person who wasn't abused as a child. Trauma can also be inflicted not by what happens to you, but what doesn't happen that should happen. So that when your needs aren't met, that can wound as well. Even though you weren't overtly hurt, you're still wounded by not having your essential human needs met. But if that was the trauma of what happened to you, guess what? It'll never unhappen. But if trauma is what happened inside you, the wound that you sustained, the meaning you made of it, the way you then came to believe certain things about yourself or the world or other people. And if trauma was that disconnection from the authentic self, well, guess what? Good news. That can be restored at any moment. Because I was hurt so early, one of the adaptations you make emotionally when you're being hurt is you shut down your heart so you won't be so hurt. When you shut down your heart, it means that when you see somebody else suffer, you're not as open to them as you might be. So I was capable of being very harsh with my son, with all my children, not because I didn't love them, but because my heart wasn't as open as it needed to have been. And that shutdown of the heart was a protective device on my part as a small child. Not like I had had a peaceful life before. My life began in chaos. It began in the Second World War as a Jewish infant under the Nazi occupation. So chaos is all I knew. So that's where I learned to function. So I had nothing to compare it to now. What usually happens is the same that I understand happened to you. At some point, you get a big wake up. There's a Greek playwright, Aeschylus, who wrote 2,500 years ago in one of his plays that the ways the gods created us, you have to suffer into truth. So it's not like I had a big epiphany. Perhaps you did from one day to the next. I didn't. But I suffered in my life and my children suffered. And it doesn't matter how successful I was. And so I had to actually ask myself, what is the source of this? So it was a painful process, which continues to this day, of waking up to who I am not and who I really am. And the more I become who I am, the more peaceful life becomes for such strange reason. The more satisfying it becomes and the less anxiety there is and so on. But it's a lifelong process. I have a regular practice. If I meditate, do my yoga, if I pay attention to myself, I'm much less likely to sink back into old patterns. But for most of us, it's ongoing work, and it's a lifetime's work, and that's okay. That's what it means to be a human being. But I've done a lot of healing over the years in all kinds of ways, and I worked with many others, helped their healing. So just look at yourself. How are you behaving? How are you showing up? What is the impact of how you speak and how you act on other people? What is the impact on yourself? What is driving that behavior? What are those patterns? Where did they come from? What can you do to change them? I think these are key questions that people who want to heal and be kind to themselves and to others need to ask themselves. Seeking itself is a stance of deficiency because you're saying you haven't got something. In other words, you're not in touch with your own wholeness. So you're creating more problems for yourself by positing yourself as a seeker. That's one way to look at it. I'm not sure that's what they would say, but I've heard similar statements. Seeking, as long as it's in the service of truth, is great. If it's in the service of certainty, it can be a limitation. So people can use that truth seeking both to deepen their relationship to reality or to actually limit their relationship to reality. And I think it's a California-based Buddhist teacher, psychologist John Wellwood, who talks about what he calls a spiritual bypass. And I've seen a lot of people using a spiritual bypass to get away from themselves. So that the so-called spiritual seeing itself and the seeing of transcendent experience and the self-definition as a spiritual seeker can be a way of avoiding contact with their truer selves, even though it's being done in the name of contact with the truer self. There is an intelligence, and I'm not speaking about a operative creature up there or out there somewhere doing things and deciding things, but there's an intelligence in nature and creation that if we ignore, we create suffering for ourselves and other people. And aligning with that intelligence and aligning with that connection is really what, whether we do so consciously or whether we do so because we're called to do that in ways that manifest compassion and connection and love. That's the way we're meant to be. And so the recognizing that and the striving for it is what I call spirituality. The paths are many. Some find it through religion. Sometimes religion is an obstacle to that. In fact, often it is, but it may be a conduit to it as well, depending on who and how and where. It's what people are seeking. Many other paths that are not religious, but fundamentally, there's this spiritual nature that if we ignore, we're actually ignoring an essential part of ourselves. If you look at the scientific literature on what triggers people's stress, it's uncertainty, conflict, and loss of control, which pretty much characterizes life under globalized capitalism for a lot of people around the world. So when you say we need to make an effort to reduce stress, what I'm actually arguing is that stress is a very function of the particular system that we're living under. So that, yes, we can do a lot individually to recognize stress and to reduce it and not to generate more stress for ourselves as best we can. That's entirely possible and even necessary. But then there's also these broader conditions. I mean, it's hard to tell, advice, like a Canadian health expert said, if you don't want to get sick, don't be poor, don't get out, don't live near a railway line, don't get a job in a toxic industry, and go on lots of vacations to sunny climes. As an adult, if I were to intrude on your space in a hostile or threatening way, at some point, you'd want to get angry with me. My space, get out. That's healthy anger. So healthy anger is a boundary defense. It just keeps you from being invaded and being intruded upon. We have a circuit in our brain for anger. Anger is not a bad thing. All animals have a circuitry, all mammals have anger circuitry in their brain. Why? Because it helps them defend their territories. You're in my space, get out. It's healthy. In fact, it prevents conflict. Because if I mount a big anger display, we might not come to blows. So anger is a boundary defense, right? It's no longer a question of how do we try and get the other person to change, but how do we learn together to be in the present rather than coming from the past. And that's beautiful work. So that relationships, they can be hell, but they can also be the pathway out of hell if there's sufficient willingness and mutual support to do so. The more sensitive you are by nature, genetically, the more hurt you're going to be. Some of the worst criminals are the most sensitive people in the world. And by sensitive, I don't mean that they're aware and care for the feelings of others. I mean that they were born so sensitive that they were hurt much more easily than others. They felt more. When they were hurt, they felt more. The more they felt, the more pain they felt, the more they had to shut down. The more they shut down, the less compassionate and the more cruel they became. Once those of them that can work through their pain and their trauma actually become very sweet and loving people. And I've seen this repeatedly, and so have many others. Sensitivity is simply a trait that people tend to be born with. It's probably significantly genetically determined. And the more sensitive you are, the word sensitivity itself comes from the Latin word for feeling. To sensere means to feel. So the more sensitive you are, the more you feel. Now, the more you feel, of course, the more you absorb and sense and get in tune with the environment, which is what artists do. Poets, artists, actors, creators of, sculptors, actors, dancers. It's just like they have these antenna out that just pull in energies, which really promotes what you call the superpower of creativity. But that same sensitivity also makes them more susceptible to pain. Loneliness is always perception. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely. Alone is just a fact and that we can embrace and make decisions about. Loneliness is got an emotional charge to it, and that's very much a matter of perception. You can be alone and not be lonely, and you can be surrounded by all kinds of people and be completely lonely. So that depends, how open am I? How vulnerable am I really willing to be? What defenses have I erected around myself to protect myself that keeps me from really contacting other people? So I think we unwittingly generate loneliness. There's also something else that happens, and you referred to this earlier. You talked about elders. So in our society, we don't talk about elders. We talk about the elderly. It's not the same. In our society that defines people so much in terms of their economic value, we tend to discard people that are not perceived as having economic value either as producers or consumers. So this society generates a lot of loneliness just because of its materialistic values. The addiction wasn't your problem. Your addiction was your attempt to solve the problem. And the real question is, how did that problem develop? How come with 7 billion human beings in the world, you felt lonely? How come you lacked a sense of agency, control, authority in your life? Why were you in so much emotional pain? And everything you said, the loneliness, the lack of power, the lack of control, the anxiety, these are forms of emotional pain. So my mantra around addiction is not why the addiction, but why the pain.